Just wondering whether there are any questions from the people in the audience for the panel members. Yes.
I just wondered if you have any data on the usage by older people. What percentage of the population of older people are using or have access to the internet? You said lots of people do, or everybody does. Do you have some data on that?
Yes, sorry. We only measure up to from up to 75 years old, from 64 to 75 years old, I think. And I just checked it for 2014, and it was 88% that have used internet or computer in the last 3 months.
And just to come back to that point, for anybody from the EU, it is still a scandal that we get data up to the age of 74. And we really need, people don't die at 74. And in fact, some of the most important usage will be people after 75 and onwards. So we actually do need that data. Thank you.
And that might also be a statement to keep people, elderly people, may I say so, after 74 as an important focus group in your policy. Is that your statement? Max, you had a...
Hello, Max Dekkers, independent consultant from Spain. I just noticed that both Mrs. Placencia and Mrs. Moledo were putting very much emphasis on this enforcement. I just wonder, do you actually know whether that works? Legal measures and enforcement, does that work better than awareness and training? And I've been aware of many initiatives where sort of a comply or explain mechanism works much better than enforcing people who are unwilling. Thank you.
Yes, I'm going to start by allusions, by the comments on the data, because I think it's a very important issue. And we are very much aware and very much concerned about the lack of European comparable data on the situation of disabled persons and older persons. Currently, there are very few surveys that go. There is the Silk survey that goes up to all the ages until people die, but not all the surveys do so. I would like to clarify how the European statistical system works and ask your help to make that plea that you have made a reality. The Commission, through Eurostat, can put money on the table and can ask the member states, and I'm going to simplify a lot, being not very legally orthodox, but so that you understand clear the message. The Commission, through member states, through Eurostat, can ask and could put money on the table in order to have surveys being developed by national statistical offices. Eurostat does not collect statistics. The ones that collect the statistics are the national statistical offices. Now, we have done so in a couple of surveys. Let me share with you the experience. A couple of years ago, we put a considerable amount of money on the table in order to carry out a survey on disability and participation. Some, and quite a number, and I don't name them because I don't know them by heart, but you can find it on the web. Quite a number of member states refused because of lack of insufficient budget, because priorities, for different reasons, very valid reasons. They refused to carry out those surveys. So in that case, we had to use, and we decided to use, private consultants to gather that data, despite this means questionable quality of the data and some other issues. But we did so. Now, we are asking now the National Statistical Office to mainstream a disability question in all the social surveys, and there is a discussion going on the revisiting the Information Society surveys. We are putting that question to add questions on disability, add questions on the aging population, add more questions. It's up to the national statistical offices to agree to do it or not. So please, I take the question very serious and I thank you for having raised it, but I ask you please go back to your national statistical offices and make them clear that you need that data is essential and that it is very important for the implementation to get that data. Sorry to have extended that, but it is a key moment now in which certain discussions are happening at policy level, that if this issue is not brought to the national statistical offices, it will not happen in the next 5 to 10 years. Yeah? So that's the first point. The second point.
I think there's maybe a question referring to the first point. Do you take questions now? Because I saw you had your hand up, so maybe it's a clarifying question. Yeah, there was the second question was about enforcing. So I suggest that if there are any questions on the first topic, that we take them now and then go into the second one. Yeah.
Yeah, this is Susanna from Funka. Thank you, Ima, for stressing this. I agree on everything you say, but there's also another layer of problems from some of the Scandinavian countries. We do have numbers, and the statistical departments do some questions around disabilities. But when you look closer to the numbers, we find that they are actually very much a lie. For example, we say people with disabilities when we mean mostly blind people, because they are the only ones that can answer this service, because the service as such are only made accessible for screen reader usage, and they are absolutely impossible for many other uses, and so on. So we have a large problem also in the countries where we do pose these kind of questions because of the for many reasons. For example, unaccessibility in the format of the service, but also the way the questions are posed, and also the way the results are presented, as if we actually know something about people with disabilities. We don't.
One last question on this one, and then we go to the subject of.
Can I just comment? I agree with your point. 10 years ago, we pressed for data to be gathered from the age up until then. The EU gathered data, the Eurostat, for up to 64. And we pressurised by insulting or being rather rude to the European Commission Statistical Office, who then actually started gathering data up to the 74. It is difficult, but it's more and more important when average life expectancy is 80. And so this is, I agree with you, and I think you will make me go home and write a letter. And I think that's worth doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we had another question from Max that actually asked whether you have any idea on the power of enforcement and legislation versus training and stimulating, right? Would you please respond to that second question as well?
Well, first of all, those two items are not contradictory. Actually, they are complementary to each other, and I think we should emphasize that we need both. I mean, we need an enforcement mechanism, and we need training and raising awareness of the importance of this issue. We need both, and I think an enforcement body could help to carry out those trainings and those resources compilation and the relationship with users and so on. So yeah, for us, we stress a lot the importance of an enforcement mechanism, because we have seen many legislation at national level with very good intentions, but then they are not fully implemented. I think you know some examples. And on the opposite, and let me put an example of the other side of the Atlantic. In the U.S., some months ago, I saw that the Department of Justice set an agreement with the main private online provider of like a supermarket, groceries, but you can buy online. I don't remember exactly now the. No, I don't. Peapots or something like that. I don't remember exactly the name, but it's one of the biggest in the U.S. And they set up an agreement to avoid a fine, I think. the company agreed to establish an accessibility policy inside their web team to start training their web developers and the people managing the content of the website to review the accessibility of their website in 1 year and report to the Department of Justice. So a set of measures that the U.S. government enforced or made this website to put in place and to increase and to have the mechanisms to provide a reasonable level of web accessibility. So I think this is a good example, and it's a private company, it's a private website. So yeah, I believe that maybe I can add something else, but I believe the enforcement mechanism is very important to ensure that the legislation is implemented.
Yeah, no, just to elaborate a little bit, continuing, I mean, I agree with what Alejandro had said, but I wanted to add a little bit of information within the same country, the same laws, different laws. So when we're talking about the US, in the US you have accessibility laws that follow different enforcement mechanisms. You have ADA, which is, or the transport legislation, which is enforced by the Department of Justice of the Department of Transportation. And people can be, or companies, organizations can be taken to court, and big fines can be put, and it seems to be working. Well, that's what the US reportings are saying. At the same time, I hear from the US professionals that other pieces of legislation, like Section 255 of the Telecommunications Act, is not enforced directly by a court or an independent body. In fact, is the ministry, the equivalent, the FCC, so the Federal Communications Commission, which is the equivalent to the Ministry of Telecommunications, the one that take complaints and decide what to do. And regularly, I read and I hear in conferences that that system, which is a less strong enforcement mechanism, is working less. And that is part of the of the data that, or the comments or the reasons that we hear regularly. Thank you.
We had two questions, I think. Number 63, I think your name is Bart.
Yes, it's more a comment than a question. I think it's time for some enforcement, because we have had promises for many years that we will do it voluntary, and it did not really work. So I think we need indeed some kind of enforcement. But I agree also with the person who asked the initial question, that enforcement only works if the law is good. If we have a bad law, people tend indeed to do only what is really prescribed by the law. So the law must be good, and there must be some enforcement in place, because we have had many action plans and digital agendas making promises about accessibility, but all the testing we do, there might be a small increase in the figures, but there is still a lot of inaccessibility. So I think only a good law and a good enforcement mechanism is something we need by now.
We had another question or comment from the Mr. in the sorry, and then we'll come to Funka.
I'm Richard Warren from London Website Auditing. We've been talking about legislation, and I'd like to take that up because it's been going on for a long time. I remember 15 or so years ago, we had legislation in place about accessibility. And working in London now, I have UK legislation, I have European legislation, and I have United Nations legislation. So we have ample legislation. I'm not asking for more, I'm asking for it to be used. And when we've tried to use it in the UK, and we tried to go as far as the United Nations for their convention, we kept coming across problems in actually trying to get into it. But in America now, you talked about that, and earlier, before your one, was a group called Target. And they were sued by a blind person because they had an image which had a special offer. And of course, the blind person couldn't see the special offer, so missed out on the special offer. And as a result of that, they worked out that any blind person would have missed it out. And Target was required by law to put aside $6 million in order to cover the cost of any other blind people who now found out about it and so on. And that forced Target then to make their website more accessible. And it's at that level that I believe we've got to work, working from the ground up, with individual users who are able to sue or at least complain and get their complaints listened to. So rather than setting up legislation bodies and so on that are going to try and do it themselves, we need to encourage users. We need to provide facilities for them to be able to make their complaints and to help them take it forward. That then would enable more people to say, oh, we better have training because we're going to get a problem. And the more it's raised as a profile, we'll get better. Thank you.
Alejandro would like to respond to that, and afterwards we come to...
Thanks for your comment. I agree with you, but for now, you don't have a European legislation on web accessibility, and the point of this directive, I believe, is to harmonize the accessibility requirements for web accessibility. And of course, the UK can go beyond and require more things, but at least this will create certainty for persons with disabilities across Europe, and also companies, because they will be able to know that at least WCAG level AA will be required in all the member states. So this is I think this is necessary for businesses and also for persons with disability to be sure that at least when you go to a website of a different in a website from a different administration in a different member state, you know that at least some level of accessibility you can find there. So I don't think there is much there is a problem of having these different layers of legislation. The UN Convention is a human rights treaty, then you have your national legislation, which can be very ambitious, and then we have the harmonized legislation for the European Union, which will ensure a minimum and an adequate level of web accessibility. I think is necessary.
Okay, thank you. I understood your statement more as a call for, how would I say, towards user empowerment, instead of reinforcing legislation.
Yes, it takes so long to go through the courts and create legislation and get it enforced and so on. Whereas we could do straight away, almost set up a site and say, if you find a problem here, report it to us and we'll help you through. If we provide facility, across the word, encourage and enable.
No, I was thinking when we're talking about legislation, I agree with most of what have been said. It is important, and it's also important from a sort of democratic perspective that we show what kind of society we want. That's why I think this legislation is important, but it will not solve any of the accessibility problems, I'm quite sure, for many reasons. And I don't want us to go to the way the US is going, because working with accessibility in the US is really boring. Everyone is just talking about legislation, and they're afraid of getting sued, and they're afraid of going to jail. And I mean, that is not innovation, that is not creative, that is not positive, that is just boring and backwards, and making people afraid is not what I want to work with. So we need to sort of turn this whole thing around and talk about quality, and that we make things better instead, and talk about solutions. So, and we did a study for the European Commission a couple of years ago where we said that legislation is fine if it is, like Bart says, if it's clever and good enough. But we also need an industry that knows what they're doing. So we need to raise the competence in the industry. And we need end-user involvement, just as the gentleman in the back was talking about. And then we also need good policy work. That was the 4 pillars that we saw, because when we measure web accessibility throughout the European member states, it's not the countries that have legislations that are in top. It's the countries that have all of these 4 pillars. So there's much more to say about that, but I think legislation is important, yes, but it's not the only thing you need.
Button. Anyone who wishes to, Ima, were you wanted to respond? Oh, you're gonna have lunch together, I think. And we're on the verge of our lunch break, but I saw one more question from Bart.
It's true that a complaint from a user can lead to action from the supplier, but putting on my head as a user with a disability, it's a little bit annoying to all the time have to complain and to get things fixed. But more importantly, fixing things afterwards is not the most effective, cost-wise and efficiency-wise way of working toward accessibility. It's better to put it in from the outset than having to fix it later. That was just my comment.
Yes, Ima, please.
That I started by mentioning all these set of measures. Legislation was only one of them, that the ones that I mentioned. So I fully agree with all what has been said. I think that we should not make it antagonic the fact that we need all these elements. I think there is a common agreement. The issue is how to make it right. And I think the discussion needs to advance in order to say how each and every of those components can be of quality, can be effective, and can be functioning properly. No, I don't think I understand that there has been any discrepancy on needing these things. But as much as I say that, I also want to finish by saying, despite what is happening in the US, and I know that there are some of those elements, it's when I travel around, it's the most, and when I read about it and when I study about it, it remains the most accessible country. It really remains to be much more accessible than many of the European countries. And I am really looking forward to get from people a country that has got any of the other pillars except legislation that is more accessible than one with legislation. If that is the case, if that is what we are talking about, if you know about it, let us know.
Thank you very much for that. I don't see any hands raising, so I think we'll have to maybe look for each other at lunch break. I wrote down a whole bunch of things that have passed now, but I think Ima has just wrapped it up quite nicely, actually. So I think I would like to thank the panel and the audience for interacting and interesting discussion about the role of policymakers and legislation towards accessibility. So I'd like to thank you.